Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and Gamefound over the next week. If you're new here, we do this every week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is the place to be. But before I get started, I do like to go over some news and announcements that I just found out about over the past week, and I do have a couple to go over with you. The first is that there has been an expansion announced for the game Earth, which has routinely showed up on many reviewers' lists for the best games of 2023, often showing up at the top of the list. So if you're looking for quite possibly the best game of last year, this is definitely one that you'll want to check out. And this is a game that I was able to get to the table myself, so if you're wondering my thoughts on it, well, I thought it was okay, but I am probably not the best person to ask because this is a game that plays very similarly to games like Ark Nova or Terraforming Mars, and I am not a huge fan of those games either, even though I do have Terraforming Mars in my collection right now. That being said, I would probably recommend this one before Terraforming Mars just because it is easier to get to the table and it does have a bit of a nicer theme and definitely better artwork. But the campaign's going to be launching on April 22nd, so if you do want more details on the expansion and what it adds to the original game, as well as knowing how the original game plays, I will go into all of that during the week of its launch, so feel free to subscribe down below. But that's not all, because we do also have a new version of Dune being launched sometime later this year. We don't have an exact date for this one just yet, but this is just going to be a re-implementation of the game Dune, and I'm sure there'll be a new expansion included in this as well. But once again, I will go into a lot more detail on this one during the week of its launch, and I'll also let you know once we actually get the launch date. But if you are interested in this one, you just want to make sure that you get notified, you can go ahead and check out the Gamefound page now and just click that follow button for any updates. One last thing I want to mention is that I did officially buy my tickets and book my hotel for BreakoutCon here in Toronto during March 15th to the 17th. We don't have too many board game conventions in Canada, unfortunately, but this is one of the bigger ones, so if you are planning to attend that, feel free to reach out to me, or if you see me there, I'd be happy to play a game, and that's primarily what I'm going for. You'll probably find me just playing games all day long throughout the entire weekend. As usual, I do like to give a quick shout out to both Alex at Boardgame Co. as well as Mike over at Zilla Blitz, because I do work with both of them to keep track of all these upcoming campaigns. And Alex does put up a video at the start of each month letting you know of all the heavy hitters for that month to give you a little bit more of a look into the future. And Zilla Blitz does a similar video but focusing more on the historical war games. So if you're interested in either of those, you'll definitely want to check out both these channels. I'll have links to them in the description below, but they both post a ton of other content as well. Alex especially focuses on the board games on crowdfunding, whether it's Kickstarter, Gamefound, or Back Your Kit. And then over on Zilla Blitz, we have all sorts of content as well, but they're all focused on those historical war games. But that is everything I have for an intro, and we do have quite a lot of games launching this week, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on February 26th, and this one is called Guns of the Old West, and this plays 2 to 8 players. It takes about 45 to 90 minutes to play, and this is a game set in the Old West that offers quite a lot of variety in the way that you can play the game, and there are a bunch of different factions that you can play as, and different characters and modes of play to explore. And this is a campaign that I did cover a couple months back, but it looks like they took that time to really spruce up their campaign page and really flesh out the way that they're presenting the game. So I do recommend taking a look at this campaign page, even if you did see my previous video. But since I did already cover this one, I'm not going to go and refilm all that footage all over again, and I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. But if you do want to check out the new updates to the campaign and anything new that has been added to the game, I will have a link to the campaign page in the description below. And this one is a semi-cooperative Western sandbox-style game where players can play the game either in individual scenarios or as an overarching campaign. The game's going to be throwing players into all sorts of high-intensity action moments like train heists, bank robberies, and even gunfights, and players will be building up their own reputation as an infamous outlaw or as a reliable deputy of the law. There's also going to be a couple expansions that allow players to play as natives or military factions as well, but no matter how you play, there's always going to be a group objective and then your individual goals. And players can all win the game together by completing that grander objective. But of course, this is the Wild West and anything goes, and some of the players might rather just look after number one. This is a turn-based game where players are going to be using actions to move and interact with different areas of the board, and players will be able to attack NPCs as well as the other players. And combat in this game is resolved by rolling attack and defense dice, but of course that can be further augmented by your different stats and gear and the weapons that you choose to use. The game also offers 3 different types of cards called health, action, and time effect cards. You'll be able to use these in conjunction with some of the actions that you have available to you in order to augment those actions and either make them more powerful or have some additional effects. The game continues like this over a series of rounds with players performing their actions on their turn, trying to complete that overarching goal, but then also potentially trying to complete their own personal goals. And the personal goals don't always make you betray the other players, but a lot of them might, so it's going to be up to the players' decisions and the options available to them to decide if they want to work together as a team, or if they want to betray everyone else and try to win alone. But don't forget that you might not be the only player choosing that route, and you don't always want your intentions to be known. But if you are interested in this one, you can check it out. I'll have links to the campaign in the description below. And you can also follow along to get a free gift added to your pledge. Launching on February 27th, we have FLOE, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play. And this is a competitive game where players are going to be exploring a map as well as using worker placement to try and be the first to hit a certain amount of victory points in order to win the game. And the way that this game works is that each player is going to have their own personal player board, and you're going to have your character card that's going to be upgradable throughout the game, but it's going to give you some sort of special ability or special action. And then you're also going to have a familiar, and there are a bunch of different familiars as well that are all unique and all can be upgraded as well, but you're going to be using your character as well as your character's familiar to help you throughout the game. And your board's going to be used to track all sorts of different things throughout the game, but the most important thing is your warmth, because this essentially acts as your action points throughout the game, because as you're taking more actions throughout the board, you're going to be spending your warmth in order to do so. But like I said, your board has a lot of other uses as well. It's going to be tracking your various stats as well as special items that you might have on hand and each of the individual resources. And the way that these resource tracks work is that you'll be using them to track the amount of those resources you have, but you're also going to have an upper limit that's going to limit the amount of each resource that you can carry. And as you upgrade that, you'll be able to carry more of that resource. This is also key to upgrading other aspects of your character, because as you move each of these tracks upward, you're going to be uncovering different icons that are going to be benefiting you in different ways. And I guess before I get too far ahead of myself, I should also mention that this one is our Discord pick of the week. If you are interested in voting on your favorite games each week and seeing them in advance, you can go ahead and check our Discord in the description below. But it's no surprise that this one came out on top, because this one does look like a really solid design. It looks like a lot of fun, and for that reason, it's also my own personal pick of the week as well. And I think this game is doing a lot of things right, and what I especially like is the way that the actions work in this game. And the way that that works is that during a player's turn, they have a couple different options. They can either take a worker placement action up at the city, or they can spend their warmth in order to move around on the main board, gather different resources, and interact with the different locations out on the main map. The main map is going to be made up of a bunch of different tiles, with most of them face down at the start of the game. Then players will be able to explore and use actions to uncover those other tiles, but you'll usually need some amount of resources or need to have a skill of a certain amount in order to do so. Whenever a new tile is revealed, players are going to be placing tokens randomly on the token spaces on that tile, and I'll get into all the different types of tokens in a second here. But in order for players to actually move around on the map, you have a couple different options. You can either use the boat that's shared by all players, and of course, in order to use it, it needs to be somewhere adjacent to your character. But if that's not the case, then players can just move around by walking on the land and also by paddling through the shallow waters without the boat. Wherever you stopped with your character, you'll be able to take the token that you stopped on and gain whatever benefit it grants. But then you also get to place your familiar on any of the locations that are adjacent to that spot. This is really neat because it's going to give you a few different things to think about anytime that you're deciding where to go on the map. But these different locations and tokens can offer a wide variety of opportunities, with the most common being to gather the various resources. But there is also different locations that might allow you to engage in different encounters, which will allow you to draw a card from the encounter deck, which will usually present you with some sort of character that has a mission or objective objective for you to complete, and if you're able to do that, it will gain you with some sort of benefits. There's also a few other special locations that allow players to access other boards within the game that allow players to go diving in order to try and get a specific item that they're looking for, and you can spend more warmth to dive deeper into the water and get that specific item. But there's also another location that allows you to access the caves and fight monsters for very powerful rewards. When you first enter this cave, you're going to be fighting the easiest monsters at the front of the cave, but as you get deeper and deeper, you're going to be going up against more difficult monsters, but also being offered with bigger and better rewards. Each monster in this game can have some sort of special ability associated with it that will make them a little bit different to go up against than all the rest, but the way that combat works in this game is that you're going to be rolling dice to determine your attack power, and the number of dice that you get to roll is going to be determined by your stats, and each monster will have a base amount of damage that they'll inflict on your character each and every time that you roll your dice, but they're also going to be rolling a monster die as well, which can increase the amount of damage that they inflict. The cool thing about the way that your dice work in this game is that you can roll icons that will help you evade those attacks, but you can also roll two different types of attack icons. There are the bow and arrows, which inflict 1 damage, but then there are the swords that inflict 2 damage against your opponent. But the nice thing about rolling the arrows is that you actually get to apply that damage to the enemy before they're able to attack you, whereas the swords are applied after their attack. So if you only have a few more hits to deal on that enemy, you're going to be wanting to roll as many of those bow and arrows as possible. And there are quite a few options for you to manipulate your dice, because when you roll your dice, you can also cast spells by spending various resources to manipulate those dice in various ways. And you can also spend your warmth in order to re-roll any amount of your dice once. If you're able to defeat the monster, you're going to be getting those rewards and then moving your token deeper into the cave, but then you're going to be replacing that monster card with a new one for any other players that might be coming up behind you. But there's one more special type of location that players can visit in this game, and this one is probably the most interesting and sought after of them all, because each player can only visit each one of these locations once in the game, and they offer very powerful benefits if you're able to do so, and these are only drawn randomly from the bag with the other tokens. But the way that they work is that anytime you draw one of those special tokens, you're going to be drawing one of these special location cards and then putting it in the location that matches that token, indicating that when you visit the location that has an A on it, it's going to allow you to access the location card that's in that A slot. The benefits and the cost of the card are all going to be outlined on the card, and then once a player has visited it, they're going to be putting their colored token on that card to indicate that they can't visit it again. So as you can see, there are a lot of opportunities and excitement going on in the map here, but as I said, you're going to have to be spending your warmth in order to explore that area, and eventually you're just simply going to run out of warmth, and you're going to have to head back to the town in order to replenish your warmth, or maybe just to spend resources that you've collected so far, because aside from gaining you warmth, each of these locations will require you to spend in all your resources of a specific type in order to get the benefit of that location. And this might grant you with different items and gear that can help you along the way. They might allow you to upgrade your character or your familiar, gain companions that will reward you for completing certain actions throughout the game, or allow you to gain some secret objective cards to gain more victory points or bonuses to help you throughout the game. Another nice bonus about going to the city is that whichever resource that you decide to spend, you're then also going to be increasing the capacity of that specific resource on your board, which, like I said, can also open up new upgrades to you if you're able to uncover the icons within that track. But we can't forget about your companion as well, because just like the companion helps take additional actions out on the map, your companion will do the same thing here, but the way it works here is a little bit different, because rather than your companion taking an action out in the city, you're actually going to be assigning your companion to one of the buildings that you've built on your main player board. And there are a whole bunch of different combinations of buildings that you can build, creating all sorts of different opportunities for your companion to take whenever you do take a city action. But the game continues like this over a series of rounds, with players taking actions to gather resources and different items in order to complete different objectives and upgrade their characters, with the goal of getting the most victory points at the end of the game, and the player that's able to do that wins the game. If you are interested in this one like I am, you'll definitely want to check it out, and I will have it linked in the description below, where you can go ahead and click that button to get notified on launch. Also launching on the 27th, we have Night Express, and this plays 2 to 6 players and takes about 90 to 180 minutes to play. And this is a competitive game where players are going to be building up their trains and trying to fill them with as many passengers as possible in order to complete their routes. The game plays over 4 rounds, and at the start of each round, players are going to be drafting a route card. This is going to give you some options to put your tokens out on the board to claim those routes, but it's also going to add a number of passengers to your board. But wherever you place those passengers, you're going to be putting the route card on the left side of your board as well. And in this picture, there are already some trains out on the board, but that may not always be the case because you don't start with any trains at the beginning of the game, and instead you're going to be bidding for those in the following phase. And there's going to be a few different types of trains that you can bid on. There are the refurbished ones, the old trains, and the new trains, and these are each going to grant you a certain amount of victory points and come with different options and abilities depending on the train that you are able to claim. Of course, each of these trains will have a base cost as well, and if you are the highest bidder, then you're going to be adding your bid amount to that cost, and that's what the train is going to cost you. You'll then be able to put that train out on your board, and there's a few other things you can do as well, because you can pay extra money to refurbish any of your old trains, and you can also rearrange your trains however you like, because wherever the passenger token is on that specific lane, it's going to be indicating how full that train is, and the numbers within the train windows are going to indicate how many victory points you get. We then move into the route optimization phase, where players are going to be using worker placement to claim different actions out on the optimization board. This can allow players to place more service points out on the board, which will gain them victory points for any trains that pass through them, but it also allows players to engage in advertising activities in order to attract more passengers to their trains. And there's also many train upgrades that you can claim here in order to upgrade any of your trains. After that, an event card is going to get drawn that can have positive or negative effects on all the players, and then we move into the route assessment, where players are going to be gaining the victory points for their trains and any special wagons that they were able to add onto their train, as well as any victory points from secret objectives or for service points out on the map. Players claim those victory points, and then players are going to be drafting specialist cards in reverse victory point order, which is going to give them some special abilities or actions for the rest of the game. And then the rounds continue like this for a total of 4 rounds, and the player with the most victory points wins the game. And if you're interested in this one, you can find a link to it in the description below. Also launching on the 27th, we have The Presence, and this plays 2 to 5 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play. And this is a one versus many deduction game where one player is going to be playing as the spirit and the other players are going to be characters in a haunted house. The game has a bunch of different scenarios, and you may not always be against the spirit, but you never really know for sure, because the spirit might be a good ghost that just needs help from the players. You might be trying to work together to win the scenario, or the spirit might be working against you. Or the spirit might be a good ghost at first, but then you're unable to fulfill their request, so then they're going to be turning malevolent. Whether or not that's the case, the player's objective will be the same, and that's to reveal these 4 spirit cards that are hidden at the start of the game, because each of these cards are going to be revealing more insights into the spirit and to the house, and how exactly you trigger the endgame and potentially win the game. The thing here is that players are on a bit of a timer, because each round this token is going to be moving deeper and deeper down into the staircase, and then there's going to be some spirit tokens on that staircase as well, and the spirit might have some ways to manipulate that as well as the players. But once those 2 tokens collide, that's going to be triggering the end game, and you're going to be revealing whether or not the players have accomplished their objective. But luckily, each of the players will have some special abilities that they'll be able to use throughout the game depending on their character, but each character also has a fear track that can go up and down throughout the game depending on what the players and the spirit do, and you normally want to keep that low because some negative consequences can happen to you if that rises too high. But on a turn, players are going to be using actions to move around on the board, trade with other players, and interact with points of interest out on the map. Something that's interesting about the action phase is that there's actually an action that allows you to use action cards, which open up a whole other host of possibilities, and you'll be using these to gain clues and information about the ghost in the house, and you'll be discarding any of those cards that you use under one of the 4 cards that I mentioned previously. Your goal here is to try and match the icons on those cards with what you think the unrevealed card will have. This can gain you some positive benefits if you guess correctly when that card does become revealed. Players might also find some gear or items in the game that can provide some instant or ongoing effects that they can use to augment their actions. But something that's interesting about this game is that players get a lot more benefits when they are in the same room as each other, because any items that you use or actions that you perform could benefit not only yourself but anyone else in that room. But of course, after the players have had their turns, it's going to be moving on to the spirit's turn. And then the spirit's going to be using their cards and actions to try and manipulate the board in their favor. But what's interesting about the spirit is that their actions become a lot more powerful if they have more presence within a room. And there's going to be these blue dice that are across all the different rooms, indicating how much presence the spirit has there. The game continues like this until those tokens on the staircase collide, and then you're going to be revealing the spirit's true intentions and determine if the players have won or lost that scenario. And if you are interested in this one, you can check it out. I'll have linked in the description down below. Also on the 27th, we have the Expedition Northwest Passage, the HMS Terror Edition. And this is a game for 1 to 4 players. It takes about 60 minutes to play. And this is a competitive exploration game where players are trying to get to the Northwest Passage at the far end of the board and then get back home safely before the end of the season. Because the way that this game works is that the season is going to be changing each and every round with a token that's moving around the board. Any tiles below that token are considered unfrozen tiles, and you can just interpret them the way that they are visually represented, with the water being the water and the land being the land. But any tiles above that token are going to be considered completely frozen, and you won't be able to navigate your ships through it, and you won't be able to move any ships that get stuck in the frozen ice. But instead, you're going to be deploying these little sleds that can move across the land normally. But once all the water is frozen, your sleds can move through that frozen area as well. But before I get into the details of how the game plays, I just want to mention that this is a new edition of an existing game. Every aspect of the game has been completely overhauled, and they're also adding a solo and co-op mode as well. And they're also going to be adding a new terror expansion, which I'm sure will add a lot of interesting events. But the way the game works is that players are going to be taking turns performing various actions on their turn. One of those actions might be to take a tile from the display and then place it anywhere that they want out on the board, so long as the tile matches up with the adjacent land and water wherever you place that tile. It is possible that when you place a tile, you'll end up with an empty square somewhere in the middle of the map. And anytime that happens, you just take one of these square tiles for free and fill it in just to give it that complete look. Anytime that a tile is taken from the display, you're going to be replacing it with a new one from the supply. And each of these tiles can have different icons on them, which can grant players with different resources, which they can try to collect to race for victory points as they play throughout the game. And this is one of the main ways to get victory points throughout the game, but something to note with this is that the main board is actually divided into 3 different sections, and depending on where you are acquiring those tokens, you're going to be getting a point multiplier based on the number outlined on the board. But like I said, players can also gain victory points by making it to the opposite end of the board, and this is not a requirement in order to win the game. You just get a lump sum of victory points if you're able to do so, with the players getting their first getting the higher victory point tokens. This works the exact same way for returning back home, because the first player to make it back to their starting position are also going to have access to the higher victory point tokens there. So there is a bit of a race to reach the end of the board and then be the first to make it back, but you're not only racing against each other, because there's the season token that's going to be moving around the perimeter of the board, and once it reaches its final location, any players still located in the Northwest Passage are going to be lost to the Northwest Passage. That's going to be costing you some victory points at the end of the game, which makes winning the game very unlikely. But I did mention, as that season token's moving around the board, it's going to be dictating which sections of the board are frozen and which sections are not. And like I said, you'll be able to deploy your sled in order to move around those frozen sections. But what's cool about this is that every action that you perform in this game is going to be done by exhausting some of your crew, and you're going to have a set amount of crew at the top of your board, and then you're going to be indicating that they're exhausted by moving them to the bottom anytime that you use them to perform an action. But anytime that you move your sled away from your boat, you'll then have to decide how many of your crew you want to move into the column to go with your sled. This means that however many crew you decide to send off in your sled, you are stuck with that decision until you get that sled back to the ship. And anytime that you do have your sled separated from your ship, the actions work in the exact same way, with you using any of your unexhausted crew in order to perform actions around your ship or your sled, and then exhausting them to the bottom of the board in their associated lanes. These actions will essentially allow you to place new tiles, move your sled or your boat across the water or land, and also pick up any tokens from a tile. The game continues like this, with the players taking turns performing their actions to explore and reach the end of the Northwest Passage, and then try to make it home safely before that season token gets all the way around the board. The player with the most victory points at the end of all that wins the game, and if you are interested in this one, you can check it out. I'll have it linked in the description below. Also launching on the 27th, we have Ascending Empires, the Zenith edition, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play, and this is a re-implementation of the original game, but the changes here are mostly cosmetic with all sorts of upgrades to the components, but there are also some rules tweaks and improvements as well, and also a few new mechanisms thrown in, and I'll be explaining all the new rules to the game, but if you are familiar with the original game, this will sound very similar to that original rule set. And this is a competitive 4X game where players are going to be discovering planets, exploring the galaxy, and trying to expand their presence there. Each player starts in an opposite corner of the map, but what's interesting about this game is that players will have different troops and types of ships that they're going to be using to their advantage to explore the galaxy, but in order to do that, this game does incorporate some amount of dexterity because you're going to be flicking those ships across the galaxy to try and visit those new planets or engage in battle with your opponents. Each player also has their own player board that they're going to be using to keep track of their available troops and any of their ships that they're able to acquire so far, but it's also going to be used to keep track of any of your upgrades or improvements throughout the game, because there's also 4 different technology tracks that players will be able to move up throughout the game, and moving up those tracks will augment your actions or give you some special abilities. But what's new in this version of the game is that each of those tracks is going to be associated with a unique larger ship, and once you completely max out one of those tracks, you're going to be gaining the associated ship for that track. And there are a bunch of different actions you can perform in this game, with most of those actions requiring you to spend a certain amount of troops as a resource in order to perform that action. But this new version of the game also introduces a new system that allows you to spend energy in order to increase the amount of times you can perform a specific action. The different actions could allow you to recruit troops to a planet that you have some presence on in order to gain more troops there. You can use an action to launch a ship from one of your planets, which allows you to put a ship token adjacent to that planet, but then you're going to be using a different action in order to move that ship. And like I said, in this game, you're going to be moving your ships by flicking them, and you're going to explode if you crash into any already explored planets, or if you crash into any other ship on the board, whether it is yours or an opponent's. But other than each player's starting planet, all the other planets on the board are going to be starting unexplored, which is going to be indicated by having them face down on the board. And if you flick your ship into one of those, that is completely fine, and that's going to allow you to explore that planet and also give you the option to land on it, which will bring your ship back to your supply but allow you to put some troops there for free. There are a few other maneuvers you can try to perform during the flicking, and that's to try and get 2 of your ships within range of an opponent's ship, because if you're able to get 2 of your ships to one of your opponents, then you can immediately delete them from the board and gain yourself a victory point. You can also try and flick your ships into orbit around any of the existing planets, and that will allow you to perform a blockade around that planet, essentially preventing any of the other players from gaining access to it. This new version is also going to be introducing some new free actions that can be performed anytime during your movement. The previous version of this game also had an action known as the mining action, and that has been completely replaced with a new interact action, which is going to be triggering different effects on other game components such as missions and relics that you gain throughout the game, and these are going to have different outcomes depending on what you're interacting with, so it's just making that mining action a little bit more flexible and making some new possibilities now possible. But like I said, this is a 4X game, and that wouldn't be complete without building some buildings. And once you do land on a planet and you have enough troops there, you'll be able to build different types of buildings. The first one is a research facility, and this one is really nice because anytime that you build that on a associated planet, each of the planets are going to be color-coded, and you're going to be moving up your technology track for that specific color. And as I mentioned, those technology tracks are really nice because they gain you all sorts of upgrades as well as possibly a brand new ship. But players can also build colonies on the planets and even eventually upgrade those to full-fledged cities, and these are going to be gaining you even more victory points at the end of the game, which is the final objective here. And the game continues like this, with players taking turns performing any of those actions. And like I said, this new version is going to be including all sorts of component upgrades, including neoprene mats, plastic components, and miniatures, as well as some upgraded artwork on the cards that you'll be using for various missions and special actions throughout the game. And if you are interested in this one, you can check it out. I'll have it linked in the description below. And of course, you can click to get notified. And this next one here isn't exactly a board game, but I do think it's worth checking out, and I think it's worth mentioning here because it is offering something that's very versatile, and I think it's a really great idea, and also is at an affordable price because this is the Affordable Forces. But essentially what this is a whole whack of different standees that you could use in your board games, but this is more designed for any tabletop RPG experiences. What's nice about these is that there's actually over 750 pieces, with each of them being double-sided, so no matter how you're looking at them, you'll still be able to enjoy that artwork. And something that's really interesting about the artwork in this game is that each of these are designed with a dry erase surface, which means that you can color these in whatever color you want and change that color from game to game if you need a specific design for the particular game that you're playing. But if you do just want to permanently color these, you can just go ahead and use a alcohol-based permanent marker, and then you can just reuse these without ever worrying about having to color them. Since these are all essentially made with cardstock, you can just go ahead and store all of these in a binder, and there will be one provided in the campaign, which just allows you to keep a lot of options right on your shelf with all your games anytime that you need to bust them out. If you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description down below. Also launching on the 27th, we have the return of Thunder Road Vendetta, and this is going to be offering you the Carnival of Chaos edition. This is going to include everything from Maximum Chrome, which is a ton of different expansions and upgrades, but it's also going to be introducing a new way to play and a 5th player standard set of vehicles. If you are interested in this one, this is a campaign that I already did cover back during its original launch, and I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. But if you do want to check out the campaign, I'll leave a link to it in the description down below. And this is being published by Restoration Games, who specializes in taking some older games that a lot of people really love, and then brushing them up, cleaning them up, re-implementing some of the rules, improving the game, streamlining it, upgrading the components, and re-releasing it in a brand new package. And this is a hectic racing game where players are going to be trying to get to that finish line first, but on the way there they might just happen to drift, shoot, or run their opponents off the road. Each player in this game is going to be managing their own crew of vehicles. They're going to have 3 different sized cars, a small, medium, and large, and then a helicopter that they can send in and straight up eliminate their opponents. The different cars aren't just for looks, their sizes actually do matter. The bigger ones are going to be better at pushing and shoving other cars out of the way, while the smaller ones are going to be a little better at evading bullets and weapons fired from your opponent's vehicles. And the way that this game works is that each player is going to be rolling their own set of dice, and the pips on those dice indicate how many movements you can allocate to each of your vehicles. You can only assign 1 die to each vehicle, so you're going to have to pick and choose who gets more movement and who gets less. Players are going to be starting on one side of the board, and there's going to be different obstacles to avoid, like mud pits that can slow you down, as well as different hazards that you'll have to flip to reveal what exactly you're running into. And these hazard tokens can reveal different obstacles that you might find on your typical drive, such as oil slicks, mud patches, other car crashes, or even those pesky landmines. Of course, you'll want to try to avoid those, but no one's going to fault you if you happen to bump one of your opponents into them. Once you've issued a die to each of your vehicles, you'll always have 1 die left, and with that one you can put it out onto your command board, which will allow you to perform one of 4 actions, such as repairing damage, getting a nitro boost, sending out one of your helicopters against your opponents, or drifting through different obstacles. I think this re-implementation is going to do a really great job of maintaining that really quick action-packed gameplay, while still adding enough new terrain, weapons, and obstacles that are going to make each game feel very different from the last. And I think the designers have done a really great job of adding just enough depth to take the game to that next tier in terms of gameplay. And there will be a few expansions and add-ons as well, and you might as well just go ahead and buy this one right now because it has a ramp, and every car game needs a ramp. And another game that I did already cover because I thought it was launching last week ended up getting pushed back to this week, and this is the Ostia Pirates expansion and reprint. And this game looked like a ton of fun, and it was my pick of the week last week, so if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description below. But if you missed out on the previous footage, I'll just go ahead and roll that for you now. If you're not familiar with this game, this is a game that plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 80 to 150 minutes to play, and I did cover the original game back when it launched on Kickstarter, so I will roll that previous footage for you shortly. But I do also want to mention that this is also my own personal pick of the week, and I do have a few reasons for that. The first one being that I was really interested in that original game when it launched. I didn't end up backing it, but I did end up kicking myself afterwards for not backing it because it ended up getting a lot of positive reviews. But even aside from what other reviewers have to say, this game's also coming from the designer that created one of my favorite games of all time, which is Aqua Garden, and it's such a fantastic game. It's probably in my top 50 games of all time, so I'm surprised that more people don't make a fuss about this game. And if we're talking about my top set collection games, this game would probably be in my top 3, possibly in the top 2. That being said, I haven't played any other games by this designer, so I don't know how consistently I will like his games, but looking into Ostia myself, it does look like a game that I would like quite a bit. So with all of that combined, it does give me a lot of confidence in this game, and this is probably a game that I will end up backing. But this new Pirates expansion is going to be adding quite a lot to the game because this is quite a major expansion. It's not just adding more of the same, instead it's going to be adding in brand new elements in 4 different areas. There's going to be the pirates, which will pose a threat to your fleet throughout the game, but they can also gain you some benefits if you're able to defeat them. And players will be able to collect weapons and soldiers to help them face off against these pirates. There's also going to be the market, which is going to introduce some different rewards for being the furthest ahead or behind in certain areas. And then there's also the Home City Supporter, which allows players to get some ongoing special abilities that they'll be able to keep throughout the game. And then finally, there's the Ostia Town, where players will be able to dive deeper into the town that they are delivering at and actually build some buildings and get some ongoing benefits from those as well. Like I said, this is a campaign that I've really been looking forward to and one that I do intend to back, but I will be doing a bit more research before I fully pull the trigger on this one. But if you do want to know how the original game plays, I'll just go ahead and roll my previous footage for you now. And the main mechanisms in this game all do revolve around a Mancala system, and if you're not familiar with that mechanism, it's basically when you just pick up a bunch of pieces from one spot and then place them one by one across a series of other spaces. And the way that this game does that is in your individual player boards, where players will be choosing one of these areas on their turn to activate, and that's going to allow you to gain resources equal to the number of ships that you have on that space. But then this is where the Mancala system comes into play, because you're going to pick up all those boats and then redistribute them by placing one in each of the spaces clockwise. So you'll get your resources before you did that, but then the cool thing is that wherever your last boat lands, whichever space that is, you'll be able to perform the specific action of that space as well. So you're kind of balancing having a lot of boats on a place so that you get a lot of resources, but then you also want the right amount of boats so that you end up on the action that you want to take. And the different resources are things like permits, which help you move across the board, and then wood, wheat, and stone, and gold that allow you to upgrade different aspects of your board and build new ships. Each player will also have ships on the main board that they'll be able to move through the different areas of the board, and then you'll be able to interact with different regions and items and resources that you come across as you sail across the ocean. Making different discoveries there and completing different objectives will allow you to move up the reward track, which will also make all your victory point rewarding resources reward you even more victory points. And the end of the game is going to trigger when one player reaches the top of the track. And the reason I'm so excited about this one is that it just looks like a really elegant design. I really like the way the Mancala system is integrated and the way that it gains you resources, but then it's also tied in with the actions that you can perform. All the components and artwork all look incredible as well. This is really my type of artwork. I really like how clean it looks, and I really like how all the little components are made of wood. And artwork and components won't make me like a game that I think is a bad design, and they also won't ruin a game that I think is a good design. But it does make playing a game that I do enjoy just a little bit more enjoyable, so I really do like to see it. Also on the 27th, we have one that I've been looking forward to for a while here, because this one is Dying Light, the board game. And this plays 1 to 4 players and probably takes about 90 to 180 minutes to play. But this is a cooperative game where players are going to be working together to complete objectives of a scenario in a post-apocalyptic zombie-infested world. And if you are familiar with the video game like I am, then you know that this is based on that IP. And you also know that a big aspect of that game is the parkour, and this is something that the board game aims to do really well, and they do have a few ways to make sure that they are able to support that. One way that's done is through gaining momentum with your actions and performing perfect moves, but then this is also supported by the 3D map, which just looks so amazing out on the board. And another big aspect of the video game, if you are familiar with it, and probably a part of that game that haunts many of your dreams, is the night phase of that game, because everything transforms at night and the zombies get a lot more powerful and a lot more aggressive, and it gets a lot creepier. And that is also something that is supported in this game, not only through the mechanisms, but also through the way that the game is presented through its components, because this is a game that has something unique that I haven't seen on any other game. And that's that you can actually play this with a UV light, and the entire board and components will light up in order to allow you to play it in that way. But this is a scenario-based game, which means that there's going to be a whole booklet of different scenarios that players will be able to play through, with each of those giving you different narrative, setup, and goals and objectives, as well as your win and loss conditions. And there will also be a campaign mode as well that allows players to play through a string of scenarios and to enjoy an overarching plot. But of course, there'll be a whole variety of different characters that players can play as, each with their own miniatures and standee versions, as well as their own special abilities, which will make playing the game a little bit different depending on the character that you choose. Players will set up the board according to the scenario booklet, but then each player is going to be starting with some starting gear that can be upgraded or replaced throughout the game. The game plays over a series of rounds, where each round you're going to have the player phase where the players will be able to perform their actions, and then you're going to have the zombie phase where the zombies are going to get activated and perform their actions. But each round does represent a passage of time throughout the day, and as those rounds move forward, you're going to be keeping track of that on this round tracker. But once you pass the 7th space on this track, that's going to be moving you into the night phase, where things get a little bit more difficult. At the start of each round, players are going to be rolling any dice that they have in their supply, and then you're going to be spending those dice in order to perform actions. And the cool thing about this is that the icons on the die don't indicate the action that you're able to take. Instead, each die acts as an action point, and certain actions will require more action points, in other words, more dice, in order to perform those actions. But the icons on the die that you use to perform the action can augment that action or prepare you for later events that might happen in the round. But the different actions will allow you to do all sorts of different things, like move around on the board, climb or jump across different structures, attack the enemies, or even interact with different points of interest that you might discover out on the map. As you spend your dice to perform your actions, you're going to be placing them into this track in the center of your board to indicate that they've been used, and then you'll also gain benefits for getting to a certain point on the track. But not all these dice will come back to you in your following turn, because some of these dice might be exhausted, moving down into the lower parts of your board, keeping them there until they become unexhausted and go back into your supply. One other important thing to note about the actions is that depending on the actions that you choose, and also your relative positioning to the enemies when you are performing those actions, you can actually generate a certain amount of risk. And anytime that you gain risk in this game, you're going to be rolling an equal amount of risk dice, which can have all sorts of negative effects, like deal additional damage to you, spawn enemies out on the map, cause you to temporarily lose your dice, or generate something called exposure. But before I jump into explaining what exactly that does, I just also want to mention that if you're able to spend any dice that have this symbol on it, that is the evade symbol, and you can actually use that to reduce the amount of risk dice that you need to roll. And getting back to what the exposure does, well, it's nothing good for you, but it's great for the zombies, because after all the players have performed their actions, we're going to be moving into the zombie phase, also known as the exposure phase. And at this point in the game, the zombies are going to be able to move and attack, but the thing that determines that is that each player is going to be drawing a number of exposure cards equal to the amount of exposure that they generated. These cards are going to dictate how many enemies spawn, how many movements they get, and if there's any other special effects. And what's neat about these cards is that there is a white side and a black side, with each side representing the different effects that will happen if you are in a day round or if you are in a night round. And I did mention that things do get a lot tougher at night, and that is just one way that that happens, but there's also going to be this effect card that's in play, and depending on if it's day or night, you're going to have a different effect from that. But then also in a day phase, players get to decide the order that they want to play their characters. But at night, you're actually going to be drawing cards from a deck to determine which player gets to go in which order. But also in that deck, there are some enemy activation cards, which can actually allow the enemies to activate even during the player's turn. Not only that, but the zombies are just going to be a lot more alert during the night phase, and there's going to be more ways for you to get exposure, and the zombies are generally just going to be tougher to defeat. And there's a whole bunch of different zombies offered in this game, each with their own stats and abilities, and anytime that players get into combat with one of these zombies, you're going to be comparing the attack against the defense, depending on who's attacking who, and then you'll also be able to roll dice to deal additional damage. Of course, players do also have some gear cards and maybe some special abilities that might come in handy, so you'll want to make sure that you're making use of those whenever it is appropriate. But the game continues like this until players complete that scenario objective or get eaten alive by the hordes and hordes of zombies. And if you are interested in either of those outcomes, definitely go ahead and check out this campaign. I'll have it linked in the description below. Also launching on the 27th, we have Chroma Arcana, and this plays 2 players and takes about 20 to 60 minutes to play. And this one is a competitive card battler where players are going to be using cards of different colors in order to cast spells and deal damage to their opponent and try to be the first to reduce their opponent's health down to 0. The way that the game works is that you're going to be starting by drafting a specific character card as well as a permanent spell card that you'll be able to keep in play for the entirety of the game. Players will always have a hand of 5 cards, but each card in this game has a couple different uses. You can either use it as a spell or you can use it to charge another spell, because on your turn you're allowed to play a spell card onto your board and to put it into play, but in order to do that you have to pay the cost by discarding the appropriate number of cards that also match that spell's color. Any charged spells will go into your active area at the top of the board, and these spells can have instant or ongoing or triggered effects, which when they are triggered they will be discarded, but there are also some special cards that you can just play to augment your turn in various ways, but you're going to be using these spells to attack your opponent and defend yourself against attacks. At the end of your turn, you're always going to be drawing back up to 5 cards, and then the rounds just continue like this until one of the player's health is reduced to 0, and then the other player will win the game. If you are interested in this one, I will have it linked in the description below. Also on the 27th, we have Logic and Lore, and this plays 2 players and takes just 30 minutes to play, and this is a competitive game where players are each going to have their own row of cards that they're trying to get into the proper order before their opponent. This does involve some deduction because players will be able to send out their dragons to gain some information about their cards, but the dragons are only going to be able to return with partial information, so to get the complete picture you're going to have to rely on information that is provided from your opponent. Unfortunately, that's all the information I have on this one. I don't know exactly how it plays, so if you do want to learn more, you'll have to check out the campaign for yourself, but I will have a link to that in the description below, and once it launches, you'll be able to check that out and jump in on the campaign if it does sound interesting. And launching on February 28th, we have Maligno Trip, and this plays 4 to 8 players and takes just 10 to 20 minutes to play. And this one looks like a really fun little deduction game where players are travelers in the Philippines trying to return from their trip back to Manila. The catch here is that your passengers may not all be what they seem because there may be some maligno among you, which is just a term to reference different spirits or evil entities that have possessed those players. The way this is determined is that at the start of the game, each player is going to be dealt 2 cards. One is going to be your character card, which is going to give you a special ability to use to your advantage throughout the game. And then the other is going to be a team card, which is going to determine whether you are a human player or one of the evil Maligno. The goal of the humans is to try to make it back to the capital city safely, but the goal of the Maligno team is to try and prevent that from happening by causing the card to run out of gas. But until either of those cases happen, each player is going to be influencing the car in different ways, causing it to go down either the superhighway, which is of course the most efficient way to get to the capital city, or by causing the car to go down various side roads. Every turn is going to result in the car moving 1 space, but the board is also broken up into these 4 different sections, with each of those sections representing a different round within the game. And at the start of each round, players are going to be voting on who they want to be the driver. And of course, if you're a human, you want a human driver, but if you are a Maligno, then you want a fellow Maligno driving the car. But that driver is not going to have full control over the car because there's always going to be one player acting as the navigator, and every turn players are going to be alternating taking control as the navigator. And the way that this works is that every turn the navigator is going to be drawing 3 cards from the deck, and these cards can have all sorts of different effects, like allowing you to use a superhighway, forcing you down a side road, or even completely turning the car around. But each of these cards will also have an amount of gas consumption as well, which does give the evil spirits a sneaky way to try and use up more gas, even if the card does allow them to go in the direction towards Manila. But whoever the navigator is, they're going to be drawing 3 of these cards and then choosing 1 to discard. Then they're going to be passing the remaining 2 to the driver. Then the driver gets to choose which card they want to activate. Meaning that if a card was played that helped or harmed you, you're not going to know completely for sure whether that was the driver's intention or the navigator's intention, or possibly both. But since the navigator has some information as to what card the driver picked, and the driver has some information as to which cards were passed to them, they might have a little bit of information giving them an idea of what the other player might be. Since every player does take turns as the navigator, every single player is going to be getting a little bit of information about at least one other player, and then hopefully you can figure out who is or isn't on your team, and who you can trust and who you shouldn't listen to at all, and hopefully piece your collective information together to try and get the car going in the right direction. If the car manages to get to the other side of the superhighway, then the human players win the game, but otherwise the humans are lost to the evil spirits forever, and the Maligno win the game instead. And if you are interested in checking this one out, you can find it in the description below, and of course click to get notified. And launching on the 29th, we have Train Rush, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 120 to 240 minutes to play. And this is a competitive train game that actually incorporates a lot of different elements. You're going to have some area control, engine building, and bidding, just to name a few. But each player is going to be starting with their own personal player board that's going to house all the different tokens that you're going to be using throughout the game. You're also going to be starting with some movement and hero cards that I will come back to in a second here. And of course, you will also have your starter train on the board, which will come with a starter car, which you'll be using to transport goods and resources across the main board. And the main board is going to be broken into a bunch of different districts where you're going to be able to try and gain influence over. The reason that influence is so important in this game is because that's how you're going to be building your engine throughout the game, and it's going to be determining the resources and number of action tokens that you get to perform in each of the following rounds. Because as you gain influence on the main board, you're going to be keeping track of your influence in each of the different districts, and then all of that is going to feed into this track on the right hand side and push your tokens upward on those tracks, gaining you even more resources and coal and even more actions on the following turn. And this image shows what that might look like a little bit later in the game as players are gaining influence in these various tracks. And I know that there's a lot going on with this board, but these tokens in the middle here are different free actions that you can earn throughout the game. And then these different tracks at the bottom here are different opportunities for players to race to complete in order to score victory points, because each of these different rows represent a different city. And then there's an amount of resources that need to be delivered to that city in order for players to claim that objective. The tracks at the very bottom earn players with different benefits as they move up and cover up different locations of that track, and the way that you move up that track is by building different buildings in the various districts. But this is a game that plays over a series of rounds, and players are going to be bidding for turn order, but then each round players are going to be checking their influence on these various tracks in order to move their tokens up this track, which is going to help you in basically every aspect of the game, but primarily with the coal that you're going to be receiving to power your train, and then also the number of action tokens that you'll get to receive, which of course having more means that you can perform more actions. Players will be using worker placement in order to perform those actions by placing action tokens out on the various boards in order to build warehouses and stations, which, like I said, do move you up those tracks, but they'll also generate you more income. Players can also gain more cars for their trains, which will then allow you to carry more cargo. And players can use an action to load more cargo onto their train, or to gain more coal to power their train, or to send out their agents to the various locations out on the board in order to gain more influence in the associated district. But after all the players have performed their actions, you move into the movement phase, where players are each going to be using one of their movement cards in order to power their train. Each of the cards is going to have a series of movements, as well as a special bonus located in the bottom left corner of the card, and each of these movements do have to be done in order, and each of them do cost a certain amount of coal. So the more that you move down this card, the more coal you're going to be spending, but if you do spend enough, then you'll be unlocking the special bonus of that card, but otherwise you won't be able to access it. Your trains will always have to follow the arrows outlined on the various tracks, but anytime that you meet an intersection point, you'll have a decision of where you want your train to go. You're going to gain different bonus actions depending on the locations that you travel through, and you'll be able to spend resources for benefits at these various locations, with one of those locations even being a black market. Of course, your main objective is to deliver goods to the various cities that you pass through so that you can claim your spot on the objective board, which will gain you victory points at the end of the game and also block that spot for any other players. Any city that a player passes through, they're going to be placing their token there to indicate that they've already visited that city, because like I said, this can be an end trigger for the game. At the end of the round, players can decide if they want to play any of their hero cards, and these are going to have different objectives or requirements that you're going to be going after throughout the game. And once you feel like you have fulfilled it, you'll be able to play that to gain either the bonus that it provides or the victory points that it can earn you at the end of the game. And the game continues like this over a series of rounds, and the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And if you do want to check it out, I'll have it linked down below. And launching on March 1st, we have Ocean Slayers, the Bermuda Chronicles, and this plays 2 to 6 players and takes about 90 to 180 minutes to play. And this is a competitive game of area control and engine building, as players are building different buildings to generate resources on the islands they control, which they can then use to build new ships and gain new crew and upgrades that they'll be able to use to try and gain the most victory points at the end of 8 rounds. The players aren't just up against each other this game, because there's also going to be a bunch of monsters showing up on the board each and every round, and it'll always be the player with the first player token that gets to decide what those monsters do. But this is a game that plays over a series of rounds, and every single round you're going to be drawing an event card, which can have some positive or negative effects to all the players or change the landscape of the game a little bit. But each of these event cards will also either spawn a new monster out onto the board or to trigger the Kraken to attack. After that, each player is going to be taking turns exploring the ocean tiles, gaining resources or gaining new upgrades, fighting ancient monsters to gain victory points, resources, or special items, with the type of island that they discover dictating the type of opportunities that it will present. The players can build or upgrade buildings on any of the unclaimed islands, and this is going to allow for an amount of resource or victory point generation, which you'll then be able to use to unlock new upgrades or defend against enemies. Players can also use those resources to construct new ships, which can have some different stats and strengths, but they can also have a different amount of crew that they're able to carry. And this all comes in handy because you'll be able to use those ships to attack the different monsters that appear out on the board, or even attack other opponents. But after all the players have performed their actions, we're going to be moving into the end of round phase, where players are going to be gathering resources from any of their islands that have resource generation, and then the player with the first player marker is going to be able to move any of the monsters however they like, and then they're going to be passing that first player marker to the following player. The monsters might attack players within range, or they might block production on islands that they are adjacent to. But the game continues like this over a series of rounds until the end of 8 rounds, and then the player with the most victory points at that point wins the game. And if you want to check it out, I will have it linked in the description below. And that is everything I have for you this week. Quite a long week, and I don't know how long this video's been so far, but don't leave yet, because we still do have a few awesome giveaways, and these are the easiest giveaways to enter ever. All you gotta do is leave a comment down below, and that'll automatically get you entered in to win a nice pledge here. And the first one is for a pledge for Biome, the nature-themed board game. This game looks like a really fun tableau builder, and the way that this game works is that players are going to be gaining different resources of different types in order to play cards into their tableau, because you're going to be using those resources either as light as food for your plants, or either as actual food for animals to place the animals out on your tableau. But different animals will interact with other animals in different ways, and also interact with the plants in different ways, and your job is to try and create the best ecosystem to get the most victory points at the end of the game. But what I really like about this game is that there is a ton of different cards offered in this game, and each of the cards is going to have their own special action that you'll be able to perform when you play that card into your tableau. But the catch here is that each card's action can only be used once in the entirety of the game. So there might be an action that you really want to use, but it might be way better to use it a bit later. So you're going to have to be strategic when you decide to use those various actions. But to enter this giveaway, all you got to do is leave a comment down below with the hashtag Biome, and you can leave a comment saying anything that you like. But if you're looking for something in particular, maybe you could let us know a fun fact that you might know about something in nature, especially if it has to do with different synergies between the different animals or plants. I don't know if this is true, but I heard that squirrels bury way more nuts than they ever actually find because their memory actually isn't really all that great. So these squirrels are burying nuts all over the place to try and find them later, but then the nuts that they don't find, I guess, could grow into new trees. So that's an interesting synergy that isn't really in the benefit of the squirrel, but it does help out the trees. And for the next giveaway, we have Boardquest Tales of Liria, and this one is kind of like an RPG in a box because this one's going to give you that sandbox RPG experience where there's going to be a lot of variety in the different actions and different decisions you can make. You can battle different monsters or the other opponents, or complete different quests and gain new gear and items that will help you along the way. But this is a game that offers a bunch of different modes of play as well, but in the competitive mode, players are trying to be the first to either defeat all their opponents or be the first to conquer a certain number of forts. The game can also be played on teams, and it does also offer a story mode for one player. And this giveaway is going to be for the premium edition, which is going to get you the board game along with all the associated upgrades and miniatures. And if you are interested in this one, all you got to do is leave a comment down below with the hashtag RPG. And you can say anything you want, but if you're looking for something in specific, maybe you could tell us of a funny moment from one of your RPGs if you've ever played one. For myself, I actually haven't played too many RPGs, but with the few that I have played, there have been several funny moments, but mostly it's just me and my party just not being aligned in our objectives or what we're trying to do, and things happening very fast around us, and none of us being able to react in an efficient way, with one time it resulting in a bunch of us breaking all our legs, and another time with one of our party members walking off a cliff, which probably resulted in more broken legs. Good luck in the giveaways, but now let's go ahead and draw the winners for last week's giveaways, and we had a few to draw here. The first one we had is Sea Dragons, then we also had Forks the second edition, as well as a pledge for Lovestruck. And we're going to draw for Sea Dragons first, so let's go ahead and use this comment picker to draw a winner. And all these extra names down here are bonus entries for my supporters over on Ko-fi. These videos take a lot of effort on my part. I've been trying to do everything right and put in a lot of effort in these videos, and I'm also doing shorts now, and I just am not seeing very many new people finding my channel. So if you do want to support the channel, well, one way is to join my Ko-fi, and it really does help make all these efforts just a little bit more sustainable for me. But if you want to help in other ways, feel free to share these videos in any of the communities that you think might enjoy it, because when people do find my videos, they seem to like them and leave comments telling me that, which I really do appreciate, and I really do love to see that this is helping other people in the community. But I don't know why, but it just seems like YouTube just doesn't show my content to very many new people. So if you're looking for a free way to help out the channel, just sharing or liking or commenting on these videos is something that, in theory, should help make these videos show up for more people. Or maybe the board game niche just isn't a very big market in YouTube. I know it doesn't have a whole lot of money in it, and also YouTubers get paid based on how lucrative the content is that they provide. So for other channels that might cover things like the stock market or luxury watches or traveling or anything like that, the ads for those videos sell for a lot more opposed to something like board games. But this is a rant for a whole other video, but my point is, if you like this content, you want to help make this a little bit more sustainable and a little bit less grindy, sharing this content helps, or joining the Ko-fi does immediately make a big difference for me. So I appreciate everyone there and anyone that's able to support. And they do also give you some bonus entries into these giveaways, which is always a nice thing. But let's go ahead and draw those comments and draw a winner. And the winner of Sea Dragons is Nicholas Poiri, which is one of our Ko-fi members. So congratulations, Nicholas. I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a nice pledge here. But now let's go ahead and draw for Fork. And we'll do the exact same thing here and draw those comments and draw the winner. And the winner of Forks is Mark Spellmeyer, which is another one of our Ko-fi members. So congratulations on the win. And now for the final giveaway, let's go ahead and draw for love. I think I just put love as the hashtag. And yes, I did do love as the hashtag, but I actually did forks rather than fork for the previous hashtag. But I just checked, and because fork is a subset of forks, I got the exact same unique comments drawn, so no issues there. Let's go ahead and put this back to love and draw those comments. And the winner of Lovestruck is John Dosa, which is another member from Ko-fi. So congratulations on the wins here. There wasn't a crazy amount of comments on the videos for these giveaways, so we do have more Ko-fi members winning this time around. And that's everything I have for you this week, but I'm not going to spend too much time on this outro because it's already 2 p.m. on Saturday, and I normally already have this video posted by now, but it's been a busy week and a lot of games, so I apologize, but I'm going to get to editing now. And until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full. What?